Okay, I want to thank you all for coming to join us this evening. I want to begin by thanking Ohel that is bringing Dr. Blumenthal to our community. We have many connections with Ohel. One of our connections is our long-standing friend, davened with us for many, many years, Rob Katz, who unfortunately, and I'm sure he'll be with us right now, but unfortunately his mother was niftarat just over Shabbos. And the Kamura was today, and the Shiva is beginning at Rob's house, and we sent to Rob Shamakam in Achemoso B'Soch Shor Avilatzin V'Shalayim, and his mother was a survivor in the we gone through not only the Shoah, but then the revolution in Hungary, which brought his parents ultimately to these shores. The organization Ohel is a brand name to Klal Yisrael, one that responds to all forms of crises, and began by responding to the crisis of children and their requirements and developing foster homes, but over the years, developing almost a web of services to Jews, individuals, and the Jewish community to help us thrive and grow through the various crises that unfortunately come our way, and through a very, very well-trained and empathetic staff who developed expertise in so many areas, they continue to grow in their service to Klal Yisrael. And this situation is no different. That now that the last already 12 weeks now, 3 months, that Klal Yisrael was first hit by the disease and by the warning that the disease caused, and then the quarantine. So there are all sorts of different aspects which then explodes in individuals and communities in different ways. And Ohel has been a very, very steady source of guidance to communities throughout this time. Dr. Blumenthal is one of the lead people at Ohel in providing this guidance and creatively developing different methods and different approaches, as each of these situations and crises have their own character and their own personalities. Dr. Blumenthal is one of the go-to people for the American rabbinate when we need advice and when we need guidance in addressing various issues that come up in our community. When issues come up in our shul and I deal with them well, it's probably because I asked Dr. Blumenthal how to take care of it. And as you will see throughout tonight's presentation, his insight and his wisdom and both the light touch and the serious touch, which come together, are all very, very comforting and give us very great strength. And the wisdom that he imparts is one that has been of great benefit to me and to many of us. And therefore, I'm very, very happy and excited that Dr. Blumenthal has agreed to speak this evening already. One of the issues that we face as a community is we have a significant community of teens. So it's the first time that we are watching our children, number one, be quarantined. Having spent so much time with us, that could drive anybody crazy. So then they have never faced this kind of uncertainty. And for us, the uncertainty is what they're going to do, whether they're going to summer camp or not. We think it's whether they play ball here or play ball outside. No, they've never faced this situation where their plans, when you ask them what they're doing in a few days, a few weeks, they don't know. And to help us appreciate all of the different things that they're going through, which we may not be attuned to, and which we sometimes may be dismissive of, and then to be able to address them I'm very, very happy that Dr. Blumenthal will be able to speak to us and guide us. And you can ask questions via the chat, and he will then respond to those questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. A very gracious introduction. I'm going to do something now that every Balabas dreamt about doing, which is I'm going to mute the Rabbi. But if you need to, Rabbi, you can please unmute yourself. But anyway, I thank you. It's a very gracious introduction, and I hope I can live up to it. I still want to ask Rishus of Rabbi Neuberger, because there might be points I might reference some Torah sources, and certainly he's far more qualified than I am to do that. And also, in turn, also thank Ohel, its CEO David Mendel, and Presidium Mel Zachter and Jay Kestenbaum for making it possible for me to give these kind of webinars. And of course, our tech department and PR department, when you're my age, you're very grateful for a tech department to help us. And then I also want to commend the Shul, the Congregation Beth Abraham. It's obviously it's Rob, it's administration, but especially want to thank Jessica Landa, who orchestrated all this and really put our heart and soul into it. It was really made sure that to communicate to me what the community needs, and really to try to ensure that the community will get the information that it needs. And so I want to thank her and commend her for her dedication and efforts. As the Rabbi mentioned, probably the most efficient way, especially we have 67 people on here, so it doesn't lend itself to people just sort of unmuting themselves and asking questions or arguing with something I'm saying or whatever it might be. So what seems to work most efficiently on presentations like this is that if you have a question or any kind of input, is to enter it through chat. You'll see in the bottom of your computer, that's one of the options, is chat option. If you hit on it, you can either send a question that everybody will see that comes from you, if you don't mind, or if you want to send a question privately, you'll send it that way. This way I will not identify who the question came from, but obviously don't make it apparent. If it's a highly individual matter, I would probably suggest that I'll give you my contact information. You can ask it privately, but try to limit yourself to questions that you believe overlap with the needs and interests of other people as well. This is being recorded. It will be edited. So if there are comments or something like that that seem to identify who the person is, it'll be edited out. But the bulk of the presentation, or maybe the entire presentation, depending how it comes out, is recorded and will be available for people who may missed it or may want to look it over, hear it over again on the Ohel website, and usually it's posted also as on YouTube. So we have to give us a day or two. The tech department sort of goes through it and edits, etc. So it may probably be available today, Sunday, probably Tuesday, latest Wednesday, if anybody is interested. So let me talk about what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to speak probably, I would say about 40, maybe 45 minutes. And then at the end, as I said, please submit questions. If I see the chat icon on my computer is lit up, I will every once in a while stop and just check because I welcome questions or comments. Somebody might have some ideas or suggestions about something I talk about, which I hadn't thought of. And I would appreciate, it'd certainly be welcome, especially now I see we're up to 76 participants. So again, it's really a tribute to your community. And also, as I said, it makes it easier to do it via chat. Let me just talk about what I'm going to talk about. First of all, I'm going to talk about some general ideas of adolescence, what makes adolescents who they are, and what this quarantine and illness, what kind of impact it's having in that context on the teens. What do we do? It's not just going to be hand-wringing. I'm going to try to give you some pragmatic advice, and also I'm going to then discuss as well the topic that the Rabbi alluded to, which is an extremely important topic, and one that was being discussed a lot, which is the missed commemorations, celebrations, and graduations, and the doubtfulness or the uncertainty regarding summer, the gap year, etc., and how do we help the adolescents, the teens, and so many soon-to-be young adults cope with this. I remember many more years ago than I care to think, Woody Allen made a film, a typical Woody Allen kind of comedy. I think it was called Take the Money and Run. It was a spoof on some of these films which traced the history and the biography of notorious criminals. And in one of his obviously satirical scenes, he attempts to escape from prison, and he's caught and he has to be punished. So he's put in solitary confinement for a week with an insurance salesman. And you actually see him walking in with a guy in a suit and a briefcase, and that's his punishment. I think if he wanted to give a sense of even a more punitive confinement, he would have confined him in a house or with a teenager for 10 weeks. That probably would have put the salesman to shame. So let's look at this. What makes it difficult, and what we can do. And by the way, like anytime I'm speaking, whenever we're talking about human behavior or people, if I do a very good job, I'm going to be mostly right. I can't be 100%. Everybody is unique. Everybody is distinct. And I often reminisce about my days at YU when I had the very special schus of being the Shir of Rabbi Kreiser. Some of you may know, or might have had Rabbi Kreiser as a Rebbe. When you were in yeshiva, a very special man, a very brilliant special man. When he heard I was going into psychology, he pulled me aside and he told me, Blumenthal, you got to be a gaon. Got to be a genius, because he's a doctor, a lung is a lung, but every patient who comes through your office is a parsha bifnei atzma, apropos to this week's parsha. So he and I those every time, even now it's over 40 years later, and if I start with a new patient, I always see Rabbi Kreiser in front of me, and I always think to myself, well, it doesn't matter how long you're doing this or how much you present or publish, you're now starting from scratch. So everybody is unique, and you have to apply these principles to the uniqueness of your situation. Okay, so what's adolescence? What is the hallmarks of adolescence? So in Parshas Bereshis, shortly after Chava Eve is created, and we now finally have a family, the Torah, in a very uncharacteristic way, stops for an editorial comment. And it says famously, Al Ken Yazovisha Saviv Vesimo V'Tavak V'Ishto V'Yulu Basar Echad. And henceforth, man shall literally abandon his mother and father. He will find a woman or a mate, and they will be like one person. And Rashi explains, what's that one person? That's a baby, and the whole process starts over again. But the Torah, in its inimitable fashion, captures the paradox of parenting. And what I mean is, suppose you have something very precious. You have a Van Gogh painting. You have a priceless jewel. You're going to lock it up in a safe. You're going to try to hold on to it. You're going to make it an heirloom. You're going to cling to it. And yet nothing is more precious to us and nothing is more valuable to us than our children. And yet, if you do your job right, they leave you, because that's the goal. We want them to grow up, become independent adults, and leave. And child rearing, paradoxically, is taking these people whom we so adore and cherish, and making sure that they go off on their own. There's an old joke about two Jewish mothers sitting on a park bench in Miami, and one of them's talking about her 45-year-old son who's still at home and still taking care of her. And she said, but he's seeing some sort of doctor who says he has something called an Oedipus. The other lady says, Oedipus, Schmidipus, as long as he loves his mother. But the point is, that's not what we want. We want children to go off on their own. And a very big step in this process of leaving the home, and we'll talk about it in terms of many dimensions, is adolescence. Adolescence really is, in terms of childhood, maybe one of the most accelerated periods of children venturing off and becoming their own person. And that explains a lot of the behaviors that we see in adolescence that sometimes are so perplexing. Now, there are two dimensions in which adolescents sort of forge their own way or leave us. One is in terms of physically, and the other is more psychologically. Physically, they're able to be away from us more. They can go to sleepaway camp. They can ultimately go to Israel. They can travel on their own. They can hop on their bike and visit someone several miles away. They can take public transportation and go to another town. They can even, at a certain point, fly on their own and visit people far away. So they have actually the physical capacity to be away from us much more. In fact, it's an interesting, just sort of side point, but it's a question I get asked a lot. Sometimes you get these kids, they're just different kind of kids. I'm not even saying necessarily that they have some sort of disorder or problem. There could be geeky kids. There could be brilliant kids. There could be kids with these very distinct interests. And elementary school is very hard for them, because in elementary school, kids like uniformity. They want to be sort of the same. So the kid who in any way sticks out is sometimes scapegoated, is sometimes, or just ostracized. It's very hard for them. But they sometimes have to say to parents, just wait till they get to high school. Let's keep them in one piece until they get to high school. Because in high school, sometimes they do a lot better. One of the reasons is that teenagers are not only more tolerant of individual difference, sometimes they kind of like it. And sometimes they find it sort of engaging and interesting. But besides that, when they get to high school, instead of going to the local day school, they're suddenly going to this very big high school that draws kids from many different places. And now suddenly they find in that group, they'll find other kids like them that are of interest. And again, they're not confined to their immediate neighborhood. So a computer geek who lives in Bergenfield and meets another computer geek who lives in Edison, so he can maybe take a trip to Edison. He can take the train or the bus and visit the friend. And so they often do better once they get to high school because, again, but they have that capacity to be physically more removed from the parents. Now, if we bring it back to what's happening now, suddenly these kids who have a need to leave the home and venture out into the community are suddenly being cooped up. So you can imagine how stressful that is. But there's another aspect of leaving the family, which is also relevant in terms of what's happening now, is what we refer to in psychology as individuation, which is the very human need to be your own person, to be a distinct individual. And it's not only an interest, it's really a basic need. In fact, if you look at settings that torture people, very often they're settings that take away your individuality. They give you uniforms, they give you numbers. So prisons or concentration camps or base Yaakov, well, maybe, okay, forget about that one. But, they give you a uniform and a number to sort of undo your individuality. And and it's interesting, if you read some of the anecdotes from people who did survive, I just mentioned the Holocaust survivor who passed away, who did survive the Nazi Holocaust, very often they took grave risks, not just to survive, but to preserve their sense of individuality, to preserve the sense of who they are because they were so dehumanized, given numbers, etc. So there's a natural need to be your own person. And this takes a feverish pitch during adolescence, which explains, and just to give you some examples, even from this past week's Parsha, the age-old question, why do we have all the Nisim and they give the identical carbon? Why couldn't the Torah just say, all Nisim gave this carbon? And there are many answers given. One of them is just to show, even though they did the same thing, they did it all in their own unique way. So it looked the same, but they put a piece of themselves into it. And that's what we all need. A similar Torah source that always struck me was one of the questions asked, why did Yitzchak wait till after the Akedah to get married? He was 37. He was an alter buffer, why after the Akedah? And there's a medrash that says that he was being teased, he was being mocked by Yishmael. Well, Yishmael said, I had a bris at 13. I had something very challenging. What did you ever do with your life? But once he had the Akedah, then he had his own banner, and he had his own story or legacy. And once he had his own story or legacy, then he was in a position to get married. So there is this need to be your own person. Now, one of the ways in which this manifests itself, and again, this becomes very important in terms of the quarantine, is that there's a shift from an idealization of parents to an idealization of two types. One is the peer group. Suddenly the peer group now becomes very important. And in a way, again, then that's adaptive, because ultimately they're going to pick someone from that peer group to be the closest family member of their lives. They're going to pick a spouse. So the peer group becomes very important. And then they also have outside of the family people whom they idealize. I don't know if it's happened to you. I remember for me with my kids, you have a young kid and he adores you and he wants to do exactly what you're doing and he roots for the same baseball team you root for. And then when he's around like 13 or so, you send him to sleepaway camp, he come up for visiting day and he's got this 16-year-old counselor and this guy's the best thing that's ever happened since white bread. Everything this kid does is great. Now you were at that 16-year-old's bris, but again, that need to idealize people outside the family is, again, that attempt to be their own person, to sort of move away from the family. Now, again, suddenly being confined in the home, they don't have that opportunity. The other thing that way in which this manifests itself is the classic adolescent rebellion. which we're all aware of. Now, within moderation, it's healthy, because again, it is the adolescent asserting his individuality. So if it isn't extreme, isn't infused with chutzpah and fighting, so he wants to look at things his way or her way. If they want to have a different opinion, if they're a little bit argumentative, that's healthy, because again, they're trying to assert their individuality. It may take even a little bit of an extreme form in adolescence, and ultimately, I mean, the ultimate result is what most of us are today, which is people who largely resemble our parents, but have our own version, have our own shita of how to be adults in this world. And that's healthy, that's normal. So this kind of rebellion, again, accounts for a lot of the teen behavior. So I'm just trying to see idea. So I mentioned all the things, and now so that by the way, there are a few other. One of the issues that become very important, and also touches upon this with adolescents during this quarantine, is their sleep patterns. There's a lot of reports now about teens who are basically up all night and sleeping all day, and very often, by the way, on their devices. On social media at night until 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 8 in the morning, and then sleeping during the day. Now, this kind of day-night reversal, or certainly going to sleep late and waking up late, again, is a classic kind of adolescent behavior. And again, if we analyze it, it serves a number of purposes. First of all, biologically. Interestingly enough, the rhythm, the sort of biological internal clock in adolescence shifts 2 hours. So if a child, pre-adolescent, would go to sleep, or if he'd be tired, let's say, and typically go to sleep at 9, now suddenly it's 11 o'clock. So there's even a biological factor taking place. And by the way, adolescents do need, especially early adolescents, do need a lot of sleep. Some say as much as 9 hours sleep, because there's so much going on biologically. They are more drained. So this pattern of going to sleep late and sleeping late the next day is a classic adolescent behavior. In fact, we don't have the luxury of doing that in the yeshiva system, but many public schools have, as a result of these findings, are starting their days later, allowing the teens to have that late night and start the day later. With our double curriculum and all that we're trying to teach the kids, we don't have that luxury. But it also, to some extent, first of all, reflects that individuation, that oppositionalism. They want to be their own person. They're going to have their own time. When everybody else is up, they're going to sleep. When everybody else is sleeping, they're going to be up. I even remember my parents, who lived in Yerushalayim, when they retired. And I remember when my oldest kids would come to Israel, and they would come over with friends. My parents used to tell me that when we go to sleep, they're waking up. And when they wake up, we're going to sleep. It was a bit of exaggeration, but that's classic teens. But they want that. They need to do things their own way. Also, again, the need to connect to their peer group. That's part of the individuation. And what better way to do it than whenever their family is asleep, to then take out their devices and connect through social media with their peers. That's the classic way in which they can sort of move away from the family and move towards the peer group. But again, it's, it can get out of hand. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, about how to handle it and what we should do about it. And then the last thing I want to talk about, which I think is important even in terms of some more recent developments, is a lot of the idealism of adolescence. I'm sure many of us can think back to when we were teens and the passion with which we felt about certain ideals. And it can be anything. It can be political ideals. It can be religious ideals. It can be any kind of ideals. I mean, from my days, it was Soviet Jewry, and it was Israel, and the broader community was civil rights. And these were things that people just felt, teens in particular, felt incredibly passionate about. Now, there's a few reasons why this happens in adolescence as well. First of all, the adolescent can think in concepts, whereas the pre-adolescent doesn't generally think in abstractions and concepts. And many of these ideals are ideals that involve concepts, broader concepts to address, and that fits with the thinking that's developing now with adolescents. And again, they have to have their own opinion, and they have to, in fact, almost have to disagree with parents or other adults, or feel sort of contrary to convention. There is that need. So some of these idealistic, passionate feelings that they have is to sort of buck the system, to be against what general communities are in favor of. And also they have a broader awareness of the world and history, etc. So they'll have a better understanding that's relevant to this. So these things all put together, again, make children very idealistic. Now, besides the coronavirus, we're actually living now at a time of huge social unrest, where there's a lot of passionate feelings about perceived social injustices, with many people expressing those feelings in some very strong ways. And that's classic. I mean, that's breeding ground for adolescents, because adolescents are the ones that are going to feel it, as we used to say in Latin, with a Brent, feeling that kind of strength. And again, especially if you have one position, you can pretty much count that they're going to have the opposite one. So again, that'll be very much an aspect of having children home, and having children home while there is so much emotional investment and feelings about what's going on, pro or con, and it doesn't really matter. The teen is going to feel it in the most extreme form. So I've raised a lot of issues. I'm kind of reminded of the classic story they tell about learning the Abarbanel. Many of you may know that the Abarbanel, in contrast to other commentators, usually starts with about 20 questions and then gives a lengthy analysis of the parsha to explain it. They told a story about a person who became an apikoros because of the Abarbanel, because every Friday night he would sit down, he would pour through the questions, and then he'd fall asleep and he never got to the answers. So I don't want to be accused of that, and I'm going to try to now address some of the things that you can do, given this context, given these challenges of who adolescents are. So first of all, and especially adolescents now, as we're quarantining, social distancing, and as I'll get to soon, have the disappointments that's facing them. So first of all, give them their physical space and give them their ideological space as much as you can. I'm guessing, since I'm addressing a crowd in Bergenfield, we're not dealing with people who are apartment dwellers, but if we are, that's all the more challenging. But maybe most, if not all, of the people here have large homes where there's opportunities for people to be apart. And that's one of the challenges in general, even in terms of marriages of this quarantine, is to gauge the apart and togetherness. Because usually what's more natural, because kids go to school or people go to work and then come back together, is now not happening, or happening less. People are now starting to go back to their more communal life. But being in the same quarters like this, we have to sometimes very deliberately give people their space, and you really do have to give them this space. And by the way, that goes, as I was speaking about, some of the idealism as well, to give them their ideological elbow room. I mean, I want to tell you, if you want to create a radical, argue with them through their adolescence. And I guarantee you that they'll become a radical person, whatever the position is. If you want them to have a more mature, nuanced position about things that happen, and again, they can feel passionately about something, but less extreme, then let them have their opinion. They need their opinion. And they're not going to be adolescents forever. They do ultimately outgrow it, maybe in 20 years, but they will ultimately, I'm joking around, but they will ultimately outgrow it. And even if they're presenting a position that you find very hard to accept or worries you in terms of where it might take them, respect their need to be different. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everything, and you can state very clearly you feel differently, but don't get into those, that kind of tug of war, especially now when there's so much tension, there's so much strong feelings in general, and you're cooped up together. So give them that space. In general, and this we're advising all parents, you don't let kids get away with everything, but we're stretching the limits a bit. We're going to be more lenient. And things that we might have felt very firmly about, we're going to get more flexible. We're in a crisis, and crises are not times to be rigid and very firm about things. There are times when you have that luxury. But right now, we need to get through this, and we need to get along. And I've had many of the discussions I've had, and again, I've been fielding many calls and doing many groups and webinars, and very often the questions are, I feel very strongly about this, that, or the other thing, and I don't want to bend on it, and I'm going to stick to my guns, and it's causing friction. when we're cooped up like this, we can't afford friction. You know, if you have a run-in with your, let's talk about it's not extreme, but if you have a run-in with your kid and he can hop on his bike and go visit a friend and come back, it's already partially diffused. Or if he can even just go out, well, I guess he can go outside and play ball a little bit, but if he could get together with his friends and have a ball game, it would be diffused. But when you don't have that break, you have to be a little more careful to make sure you get through this period without friction. I was on the phone, in the phone group, Zoom group with parents of kids with disabilities. And one parent was talking about how she's very strict about using devices and her kids using device too much and they're fighting a lot. And I said to her, now's not the time to fight. I said, let the kid on the device more. I even said to her that when all this is over, I'll help your child get off the device if my wife can get me off my devices. But now's not the time to have these kind of friction. So we're going to be a little bit more lenient. Nevertheless, you can draw the line. And if you get nothing else out of this talk, this is one of the most important messages, especially with teenagers, that I'm telling parents all the time. You can state your position and you can tell your child what you expect of them or what you feel is they should be doing or should not be doing, even if you can't enforce it. So if you want your child to go to sleep by a certain time, or you want your child to be more assiduous about their schoolwork or something like that, with a 15, 16-year-old, you can state it and you can tell them, you don't have to have consequences. And even if you tell them something and they roll their eyes and they snort and they tell you, oh, it's not I don't even know what dates they're using nowadays for the kids, but it's not the 90s or whatever, you know, and they're going to ostensibly reject what you're saying. The research, psychological research shows that if a parent states their position, nonetheless, it's in there. And the kids really do, even if they reject it, they're more likely to listen. And that's why sometimes parents, especially with very strong-minded teens, will sort of have yayish. They'll say, listen, you're not going to listen to me anyway. I'm not going to say anything. Say it. You're not going to enforce it. You know, you're not going to send them to their room. You're not going to take away their treats. But you're going to tell them what you think. And they're going to reject it, and they're going to laugh at you, and they're going to mock you. But it's in your head. And if you need any better proof, for you parents, how many of you are actually doing and saying exactly what you used to make fun of your parents saying to you? So don't back, you can take your position, and you don't have to give in totally, nor should you get into these like power struggles and imposing punishments that are not going to be followed through and you can't follow through on. It's interesting, about 2-3 years ago, Pesach Krohn called me and he told me he was going to a community to talk about kids off the derech or something. Maybe it was a few more years ago, I don't remember now. And he said to me, and the rule of thumb, Dr. Blumenthal, is unconditional love, right? And I said, yeah, but not unconditional approval. Oh, he loved it, and he's going to use it, and he's going to quote me, and he's going to put it in his Tisha B'Av speech, and he's very good about quoting me. I'm sure he did. But that's okay. You can love your children, but you don't have to approve of everything they're doing, and you can tell them that you don't approve, and that's all. You don't have to do more than that. Now, let me talk a little bit about social media and devices. Again, we're having kids up till all hours of the night with their devices, and this is a problem. One of the themes we have now that kids are being homeschooled and are home more, one of the things we're telling parents, maybe it's a little more applicable with younger children, but still important, is it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to teach or to present skills that you wouldn't otherwise have a chance to. I know parents who are giving their kids music lessons, which again, with the crazy yeshiva schedule, they wouldn't necessarily be able to. Or they're giving the children art lessons or sports lessons in sports that they can. But it's an opportunity to use this time to develop skills. And this is also, I see there's some chats entries, so I'll check them in a minute, but this is a time to teach our children something very important, which is how to manage social media. And that could be a talk unto itself. But the key point is, and I think if you would take everything a lot of very good people are saying about this, is it's here to stay. We're not going to get rid of it. We're not going back in time. We're not going back to the rotary phone. But teach children and model for children mastery over it. In other words, instead of it ruling you, You rule it. You own it. In fact, I will tell you some area where I differ from some people who are very skillfully presenting on the subject. Many people are talking about these issues in terms of the internet and social media. Will say, when it comes to dinner time, put your phone away. Or when you have or if you're having a meeting, or if you're davening, put your phone away so you won't be distracted, which is a great idea. Or I have a better idea, which is what I worked on myself. And it was hard work. I trained myself, is I keep my phone on me during dinner and it buzzes away and I don't touch it. I think that's even better. And that's a greater message to the children. It's not owning me, I own it. Even davening, I have my phone with me and I very often go like, start to grab it and then catch myself, but I've trained myself that I'm not gonna let it take over. I own it. It's a device I use and I bias over it. And I think that's even, in fact, it's interesting. Sometimes I say to people, even adults, I'll say to them, at the end of the day, go through all your messages and all your WhatsApp and find me one that couldn't wait an hour. But there's something about that device that just sort of grabs us. But again, this is an opportunity. When you wake up at 3 a.m. and your kid's still lying in bed and still playing games or still communicating, to talk to them about who owns whom, who's in charge here. And by the way, also how these devices distort our sense of time, that we just lose. There's a reason for that. There's a biological reason for that. We lose our sense of time, and how 1 hour feels like 10 minutes, because they're going to have it the rest of their lives. These devices are going to be part of their lives. I always like to quote the great philosopher and theologian, Wayne Gretzky, who says that I skate to where the puck is going, not to where it's been. We have to be prepared for where life is heading. And this is, again, a wonderful opportunity to teach your children and to focus on themes that if you're up till 3 a.m. and you're 5-6 hours on the internet, it owns you and you don't own it. Again, not fights, not confrontations, messages, lessons, which they may initially reject. But again, if you say it, it stays with them. Let me quickly look at the chats. Okay. Here's one to everybody. How hard is it to ensure social distancing when seeing teenagers grouped together in crowds outside? Thank you for mentioning that, because the teens are probably, I don't know, the whole social distancing now is under question, but the teens are the ones who are going to be among those who are going to be dismissive about it. Now, part of being dismissive about it is, again, that's rebelliousness against convention. What do they know? Well, we can be close together, but also it's very hard to be apart from their teens. Again, you explain it to them, you tell them, you help them figure out how to be social, that they can connect to their peers, even if they are 6 feet apart, and that there is a pressure to be dismissive about it. And then that's it. And there may be some kids who may not adhere to it. If it's going to become a fight, if you're going to threaten to keep them home, you're going to tie them to the bed, you're going to have more problems. Again, this is a private one. What's your take on twisted parenting method? Avi Fisher, paradoxical interventions. I'm not going to talk about anybody's specific approach. I would tell you that paradoxical interventions used judiciously. There's times when they're useful. Paradoxical intervention is when you profess a certain position, hoping they'll take the opposite one. So it's a little bit like, if you want your child to be more studious, tell them you don't care about school. And then to show you that they're rebelling, they'll care about school. You have to be very, think it out first before you use it. My feeling is that a lot of people have some very good approaches to working with kids. I'm wary when there's one size fits all, when there's one approach for all kids. I think there are many good ones, and we like to, both as mental health professionals and as parents, we like to find one that sort of does it. But sometimes what's an elixir for one person is toxic for the other. So people who have approaches, listen to it. But I will tell you something that I say to all parents that I counsel. I have some good ideas. I've been working in the field very long, but nobody knows and loves your child more. So I'm going to make a suggestion, and I want you to think about it. But if you come back to me and you tell me, it doesn't seem right, I don't think it's going to work with my kid, then I'm wrong. Because you, especially mothers, have an intuitive sense of what a child needs. So if you're getting advice from people or approaches, give it. Many of them are very good and very useful, maybe not universally, or adapt it to your child, because my approach to helping parents is it's a partnership. I have maybe the objectivity and the years experience, but you have the closeness and intimacy and awareness of your child and of yourself and what you can do. Another private question: I can't get my son to engage in davening since the quarantine started. I tried to model by making sure he sees me, stopping my day to do so, but he refused to engage. I also do not force the issue, but tell him that I wish he would daven with me, but I'm doing my best not to push him. He just refuses to engage. Do you have any advice? First of all, perfect. Don't make davening a fight, because they're not going to walk. Even if you win, you lose. It's a yotzes feda b'schara, or what they call in English a pyrrhic victory. If they have distaste for davening, it's going to be very hard. Some of the teens have a very hard time with the monotony of davening, but just it's the same thing over and over again. And there's much greater need among teens for novelty and newness. One of the things that some people have done with children who are having a very hard time davening is to suggest to them, and again, maybe discuss it with your Rav first, because this is one of those areas that blur the boundary between parenting, mental health education, and halacha. But to say to the child, you know what, put on your talis, put on your tefillin, and talk to God. Don't daven. Just say whatever you want. Just engage them in terms of, or maybe just say Kriya Shema, and then have a private conversation with Hashem. And maybe that I've found with some kids that not only helps them do it, but then ultimately gets them more engaged in the real traditional type of davening. But for the most part, you're doing the right thing. You're modeling it. You're telling them how important it is and how much you value it. And as I said before, even if he doesn't daven now, that message, what you say, is still very, very important, and it's resonating. Sometimes you have to remind parents that it doesn't matter what they are now. They're like a piece of sculpture. You're just putting them together, and it's what they're going to be when they're adults. And when he's adult, if he's a Shamatar mitzvahs, if he went through a few years where he wasn't as adherent to the mitzvahs, it's been a success. So don't think that this is the end zone. We're still in the middle of the game. Okay, let me go back to where we are. All right. Okay, actually, that's a very good segue, because at this point, I do want to talk about the very delicate topic of missed celebrations, missed graduations, the possibility that there won't be camp, or an abbreviated, truncated camp experience, or what's going to be with the gap year in Israel, and all this. So first of all, let me stop for a commercial. All good presentations have a commercial. Ohel, together with Azrieli Graduate School in Education and Hidden Sparks, tomorrow night is having a presentation at 9 o'clock dedicated totally to the issue of missed graduations. I'll be presenting along with the Dean, Dr. Rona Novak of Azrieli, and with a very interesting woman, Racheli Gross, known colloquially as the Corona Mora, if those of you have been following her, but she's actually a principal in a Long Island school and has some very interesting pragmatic suggestions. So if you want to hear a more detailed discussion, at least about graduation, join us tomorrow night. Again, it's on the Ohel website, and many of you might have gotten a blast about it from those various sources. I'll tell you personally, I have a grandson who was supposed to have a bar mitzvah on Shabbos HaGadol, and of course it was canceled after a year working on his Kriyas Torah. And we had a Tuesday night pseudo bar mitzvah on Zoom, and my daughter muted everybody, and he read the first two aliyahs of his parsha. And afterwards, the rabbi spoke, and he said it's the quietest he's ever had the shul during Kriyas Torah, and he wants to know if he can get that mute button for when everybody comes back to shul. But this is happening now. First of all, one of the issues that are coming up in terms of what's going to be next year or this summer is the ambiguity. And ambiguity in and of itself is stressful. So just the not knowing is stressful. I don't know how many of you might have had this experience. I hope none of you did. But I know that we have counseled people who, lo aleinu, have been diagnosed with cancer and need, let's say, surgery to remove the tumor. And the big question is, did the tumor spread to the lymph nodes? And you have to wait a week for the test results. And many people who unfortunately got bad results and that the tumor had spread, says that that's easier than that week of waiting. just that uncertainty, or as Chazal say, in simplified Torah fakes, that just that uncertainty alone engenders anxiety. There is one saving grace, and I hear this a lot from the kids, that they're all in the same boat. So not only are they unclear whether there's going to be some sleepaway camp or their year in Israel, summer in Israel, and or whether the fact now they know for sure they're not having the graduation, but the fact that everybody has it together makes it more tolerable. It's an interesting thing that the research shows, that if somebody, let's say, has a fire, the house catches fire and the house burns down, compared to, let's say, what happened in California. And in fact, our trauma team went to Malibu after the fires when there were hundreds of homes burnt down. It's easier when it's a lot of people together and you're not alone. And so that's one saving grace here. But start with, why are these commemorations so important? Let's talk about graduations, bar mitzvahs, engagement parties, whatever they might be. Why are they so important? And I'll tell you a personal story, which I'll mention tomorrow as well. I remember, certainly when I went to college and graduate school and all the years that I was working towards my doctorate, the dream was that I'm going to be Dr. Blumenthal. When I get my doctorate, that's going to be it. And I couldn't wait. And those of you who know how it works when you're doing dissertations, what happens is you have to do an original piece of research, which is a dissertation, and you have several meetings with your committee along the way, but the last meeting, called the orals, if you basically did what the committee said, you're passing. So the orals is more of a sort of ceremony. In fact, where I went to graduate school, they already have the champagne out, and when you walk in, they say, "Hi, doctor," sort of joking, and you go through the meeting, and they make some revisions in your dissertation, but they grant you your doctorate. And then they pull out the champagne. Of course, it wasn't in kosher champagne, so I couldn't participate. And they toast you, and that's it. And I remember walking out of the room. It's finally, I am Dr. Blumenthal. I remember saying to myself, Norman, you're the same schmo you were when you walked in. Like, what just happened? Like, what was, this was years and years. And the truth of the matter is, and I think that speaks to it, we need these commemorations. I mean, the truth is, yes, you're going to be an 8th grade graduate, whether you have a graduation or not. I mean, you're going to be a gadol, whether you have whether people throw candy at you in shul or not. But we need it. We need that because we're not malachim, and we need some sort of concrete realization that this happened. And this is really a setback. In fact, again, if we cite the Parshios, I mean, this week's Parsha in Baloska, they're blowing the trumpets whenever there's an occasion. We have to commemorate it. Even the term Bahaloska, which is a strange term. It's as you light it. You can't just go and light the menorah. You have to feel it. There has to be some sort of acknowledgement of a transition, of doing something big. And they're deprived of that when they don't have the graduations. And everybody's doing amazingly interesting ways of commemorating. I think Noam, the Yeshivat Noam takes the reward with the float. And all the other yeshivas are kicking themselves that they didn't think about it. But all right, there has to be some competition. There has to be a winner. But it's still not the same. It's still not, and it's not a celebration with your peer group. Again, how important the peer group is. And what's important for us as adults is to acknowledge that, is to commiserate. And don't downplay. Don't say, "Oh, big deal. When you're my age, you won't make a difference that you didn't go on your Washington trip." For the kid, it's a big deal. And there isn't that concrete acknowledgement of their accomplishment. And therefore, part of what we have to do is commiserate and acknowledge it. And again, that makes it easier. A big chunk of what we're doing, let's say in our trauma team, is just, as I said, commiserating and acknowledging that this is hard, and there's something very important missing out. What you can do, again, also might be helpful, and in a more natural way, weaving into your conversation when it comes up, acknowledgments that they're at a new place. They're now high school students. They're now high school graduates. They're college graduates, for that matter. And help it sink in. But you can't, it is a deprivation. And it's interesting because we're not used to deprivation. I think the Rabbi sort of alluded to this earlier. We for the last many years, we've lived in very good times. There's been some hardships, a recession here and there, and there's been some upsurge anti-Semitism things, but for the most part, things have worked out for us. We're living with a level of opulence that never existed before. Things are so easy, even keeping mitzvahs now, with shabulbs and, all the devices and, a kitchen made totally adapted to keeping Shabbos. And we're used to things being easy, and this is a first time maybe in our children's lifetime, and for many of us as well, where we have such hardships and such deprivation. So this is hard, and I think it's important to acknowledge it. In fact, it's interesting. In fact, let me just say one more thing also is you have to let our children know who are having a hard time, this won't be forever. Pandemics, other periods of hardships, for the most part, have beginning, middles, and ends. We don't know what the future holds. But we do know that usually there's an end, and we have to tell our children it's not going to be the rest of their lives. But this is a hard time. It touches upon a very interesting body of research. There's a body of research on family narratives, which is, what's the story of your family? What's your legacy? What's the story of your family? And the different types. There's one that's called the ascending, which is basically a story that, it was terrible in the old country and we came here and everything was wonderful. The other one's called the descending narrative, which is, it was wonderful in the old country, we came here and everything was terrible. And then there's what they call the oscillating narrative, which is, it was good, then it got hard, and then it got better, and then it got hard again. And the research shows that children who have, first of all, some family narrative and the oscillating narrative are better equipped to deal with stressful times than those who have no narrative or the other types of narratives. So it's part of life, and it needs to be worked into their psyche. But it is hard, and we have to acknowledge that. And even if we do a Zoom graduation and a Zoom bar mitzvah, and we have backyard celebrations and with social distancing, I understand now people are having chasnas with jump ropes where they're dancing. We have to, it's great, and we're adapting to the reality. But again, we can't deny that this isn't what they had dreamt and what we had dreamt for them. I'm going to skip a little bit because I'm coming, I'm close to the end, just trying to see what I should skip here. Okay. As long as I mention what to learn from it, there is a importance of having sort of a silver lining, lessons we can learn from it. That doesn't mean that this is good. Looking for the lessons we can learn, looking for ways in which we can grow from this. I will tell you personally, for example, having to daven at home for a long time, I've come to appreciate karbanos, which I never had the time to say. So and now that I'm going to Minyan, I come home and say karbanos. I don't know Hebrew as well as everybody else in my shul, so I can't say this quickly. But there are things we can grow from this, but doesn't make this good. It just takes away from the badness. Why this is good is only Hashem knows, and we believe it has some, like everything that happens in life, it's that there's a greater purpose and a good purpose, but it's certainly beyond our comprehension. Again, there's some things I skipped, and there is chat, so let me quickly check and see whether I can address that. Okay, if your standard for social distancing safety is different than your child's friends, parents, okay, common question I get asked. You perceive the coronavirus will be a threat to you and your family, they do not. How do you encourage your child to adhere to your standards and not dismiss you as a fanatic? This is a very common question I get asked. And by the way, where I got asked, just to show you the multiple dimensions, I did a presentation last week for the parents of Kids of Courage who have medically vulnerable children. And so there the risks are much greater. And again, other parents are more dismissive about it. And you may have to make a judgment call. You may have to assess the risks that exist and is it worth the battle? But if you feel strongly about it, again, I'll tell you the same thing I said before. I'm not responsible for them. This is our standards. I know something I used to say when my kids, when they were younger than teens, but sometimes when they'd complain, they say, the Cohens let their children go to sleep later. So we have to understand the difference between the Cohens and the Blumenthals. The Cohens love their children. That usually got some rolling eyes and snorting and they walked away. But you're entitled to have your own standards. And again, you can enforce it and you have to acknowledge them, how hard it is. It's hard to be that far apart from your friends. It's hard not to play a real basketball game where you're on top of each other. And it's hard when other people are doing it and you can't. But again, we have to, this is what our understanding, this is what we, in this, for this and this reason, this is what the experts seem to be saying. And again, you may have to leave it at that. I would not suggest like forbidding them to get together with their friends because they may be more dismissive. But no, also, by the way, also, one more thing that's very important is check with the parents of their friends. Because, you know, I always say to parents, you know, the kids during recess are plotting against us and we don't talk to the other parents. If you would call some of the parents of the children and say, are you really allowing this? Are you really sort of, you know, they may be allowing the kid not to social distance because he told his parents that you're not taking it seriously. And sometimes if you can get the parents together, at least you can have a consistent message between all the parents. Okay, I see some more chats things coming up, so let me just see now. As things begin to open up, how can I help my anxious teen transition back? Very good question. Again, one of the themes that we're emphasizing is what has been will be more. In other words, during this time of a crisis, whatever had been before will be amplified. And a child who may have had some mild manageable anxiety, or an adult for that matter, might have had mild manageable anxiety. During this crisis, it'll become very big anxiety. And the research shows, interestingly enough, some of the research on prior quarantines show that even when the quarantine is lifted, people are very wary about being socially connected. What we do, the way we adapt to new situations is we sort of change our mind to make it normal. We make what had previously been abnormal normal. Many times I've mentioned that if, let's say in February, somebody would have called me and said, my spouse, my child is dreadfully afraid of an illness. They're washing their hands 20 times a day. They won't leave the house unless they have a mask and they're not getting within 6 feet of people. I would have said, this person has a serious anxiety disorder. You better refer him quickly. Now that's normal. So we adapt to it. So when the reality changes, another way I put it sometimes is that reality changes quicker than our minds do. Sometimes we're still in that distancing, precautionary mindset, and it's even when it's allowed, we're wary and hesitant to do so. So that certainly can be, and again, especially with more anxious people, that can very often be an aspect of this adjustment. And by the way, very important is that when this is over, and God willing soon, you can't just wipe your brow and say, okay, we're going to get back to normal life. I'm advising schools. You have to have a commemorative celebration. You have to have some sort of processing because this has taken over our lives and you can't just shed it. It has to be, again, just like a graduation, you need that acknowledgement. Okay, is this recording will be accessible to listen? Yes, it is being recorded. I mentioned earlier, usually the tech team has to go through it and probably delete most of my jokes, but it will be, it'll be edited and then made available either through the Ohel website. I can, by the way, if the shul has I can certainly send the link. I'll send the link to Jessica and it can be put into the shul newsletter. It'll also be available on YouTube. Usually when they post it on Ohel website, they also post it on YouTube, so it will be available. Let me just say, sort of in conclusion, just two very quick points. We tend to exaggerate how difficult teenagers are. Sometimes we refer to them as mean-agers and things like that. Teens have a lot of fun, and teens, for the most part, are pretty healthy. They're not so disturbed, and there's something we can all learn from them. I think it's very refreshing. We can, sometimes we get set in our ways, and some of their excitement, enthusiasm, creativity, even if it's thinly veiled oppositionalism, is behaviors that we can learn from and benefit from them. So let's try to, as we're cooped up with them, manage them, but also enjoy them and benefit from their enthusiasm and their drive, which we could probably be reminded of and might be useful to us. There are sometimes unique circumstances. There are certain situations, either relationship situations or behavioral situations that are more severe and difficult. Please don't, let's destigmatize. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll give you my contact information, but there are many other very fine facilities in your neck of the woods and other organizations that are providing assistance. And there's no shame in that. We're not going to be ashamed to go to a cardiologist if we suspect heart disease, and if we're not going to be ashamed to go to the allergist. If there's, I see a question. Okay, I'll get to it in a minute. If we're going to address, asthmas on that, we shouldn't be ashamed to seek help. And we're available through Ohel. My email address, I'm going to be my simpler one, not my old one, it's longer, is drnblumenthal@gmail.com. That's drnblumenthal@gmail.com. Rabbi Neuberger and Jessica have my address. Feel free to contact me if I can be of assistance. There was a question, am I going to address camp? Okay, and you need to tell them that you love them. Yes, always. That true applies to children, teens, spouses, parents, even good friends, rebellion. Never, don't, one of the worst expressions in English is taking things for granted. As far as camp goes, again, right now we're holding by ambiguity. I mentioned earlier that's stressful. Acknowledge it. Camp today is not just a luxury. Camp today is pretty much essential. That time away, again, gives them more independence, that time to connect with peers in a meaningful way. Certain camp friends are lifelong friends. And the sports and fresh air are just worked into the landscape of the children and as part of their lives. It's not just some luxury that's missing, and it really is a deprivation. And it's still not a foregone conclusion that there won't be camp, or there may be some sort of truncated camp, but if there isn't, try to give the kids as much as you can of the camp-like experience, but it is a bona fide deprivation and needs to be acknowledged to the children. Is it Yahari Bayava? Is it going to cost them their lives? No. In the long run, will they be somehow damaged by not having camp? No, but I would venture to guess that this year, if it is missed or if it is significantly compromised, something important from their childhood is missing. I wished it weren't, but it's a reality, and I think it needs to be acknowledged. And it's a possibility that the kids will not come back to school next year, even if we start school next year, in the same refreshed manner and more relaxed manner that they would have been had they not had this stressor right now, and had they had the luxury of the camp experience. So we may have to factor that in terms of how much we expect from children once. I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure because the kids already missed a lot of material, and there might be pressure to really start at the feverish pitch. And we might not be able to. We might have to, in a more relaxed way, resume the learning, even if it's at the expense of mastering certain information, because they're not going to necessarily come back in the same mindset and spirit that they would have come back had they had the camp experience. There's much more to talk about. Again, please feel free to contact me if I can be of assistance. And I hope what I've said has been helpful, and God willing, those who've been afflicted should have a refuah shlema, and we should be out of this stress very soon. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Blumenthal, for giving us the time and helping us out, giving us the insight, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of conversations as a result. I thank Jessica for organizing this, and you see from the response to well over 100 people that it was something that we were very interested in listening and hearing about, and thank you very much.
Okay, have a good night, everybody. Be well.